6 and verses 39 to 49, and the wonderful Catherine is going to come and read it to us.
He also told them this parable. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye," when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete.
Thanks, Catherine. That's the word of God. Peace to you. I'm going to introduce some of the ideas that you find in this passage now, but I really want to encourage you to take away the passage and to read it and meditate on it this week, and then to come together if you're part of a life group. And we're going to be looking at this passage and thinking about what it might mean for our lives and the challenges we find in following it, and what joy it brings us as well. So if you're not part of a life group, join one. But yeah, go away and think about it and pray about it. This is a summary of what I'm going to say today. True Christianity makes saints. It's men and women whose lives look like Jesus and who can stand in the midst of trials. True Christianity makes saints. That's men and women whose lives look like Jesus and who can stand in the midst of trials. True Christianity makes saints. It's men and women who look like Jesus and who can stand in the midst of trials. So first of all, what do I mean by this idea that Christianity aims at saints? Saints is a funny word, isn't it? Because it has two meanings. One meaning is in the Bible is given that everybody who comes to Jesus and receives Jesus is called a saint in the Bible. And yet it also has another meaning of one who is holy. And partly that is describing a phenomenon that I think we all recognize, that we all come to Jesus and receive Jesus and are made like him when we first become Christians. But equally, you can look around the world and through history and see someone who's been walking that journey for a long time and say, oh, I see something of Jesus in your life that's more than what's in mine at the moment. And that's what is being described in the kind of traditional language of saints. We talk about St. Peter and St. Paul. Men and St. Catherine of Siena is another great saint. Men and women whose lives look like Jesus and who have learnt to stand in the midst of trials. So where do we find this in the passage? Well, look at verses 14 and 15. The first thing Jesus notes in this passage of his teaching is that the aim of the Christian life is not to obtain membership of a particular community. It's great to be a part of this church. It's lovely. It's a really nice community to be a part of, and we use the word community a lot. But that's not the aim of the Christian life. The aim of the Christian life is not to have a great friendship group, although it's great to make friends in the church. And actually, if you want to have friends, joining a church community is one of the best ways you can do that, right? Wherever I go in the country, I know that there are brothers and sisters I can go and spend time with. They will take me for dinner. When I went up to Aberdeen for the first time, they invited me back to their house, a couple in the church. We spent the afternoon together, stayed in contact by email, and they offered for me to stay with them when I go up again. Right? It's good to have friends, and the church is full of friends. But that's not the point. The point of Christianity is not to be forgiven. Forgiveness of sins is not the aim of the Christian life. Now, don't mishear me. Forgiveness is essential and wonderful. The grace of God that was willing to die in my place so I could be restored to a relationship with him and my brothers and sisters is extraordinary. But it is the beginning of the Christian story and not the end. Think of it a bit like this. I love to read Hercule Poirot novels. That's one of my part-time specialities. I read 80 books by Agatha Christie in a single year. I don't recommend you do it. I started to dream about Belgians in my sleep. Focusing exclusively on the aspect of Christianity, which is forgiveness, being made right with God, is like focusing on the first chapter of an Agatha Christie novel. It's really important that you meet the characters, but the point of the novel is the final chapter, not the first. There's a mystery, there's a journey, there's a resolution, and there's satisfaction at the end of it. For Christians, the finish line is God so transforming your life that you become a mini Jesus here on the earth and then reign with him in heaven. For Christians, the final chapter of the story, the resolution of the story, is not being forgiven. It is being transformed to be like Jesus and then to reign with him in eternity. Jesus puts it in verse 40, everyone who is fully trained will be like their teacher. That's what the ancient Christian traditions describe, using the language of sainthood, of becoming fully who you are called to be in Christ. Now, some kind of transformation like this is inevitable, whether you're religious or not. We are all changed and shaped by the various influences on our lives. We become like little versions of the people we follow, the heroes we admire, or the cultures we inhabit. I was watching the David Beckham documentary on Netflix the other day, and I was reminded of my experience at school that whenever David Beckham got a haircut, you could chant like dominoes as boys across the school would get the same haircut, right? You're laughing because I bet those who are a similar age to me remember that phenomenon very closely, right? We are all changed to be like the people we follow. That's why there are so many, bless them, I love teenagers, I love young people, love working with them. There are so many young people determined to show their individuality by dressing exactly the same as each other, right? Again, you're all laughing because you recognize the phenomenon, right? They're all rebelling against the system by conforming absolutely to it. We're all changed in this way. The question is, who are we being changed to be like? And for Christians, the answer is Jesus, or should be Jesus. Even to acknowledge this, however, forces us to ask a difficult question. Who's our teacher? Whose voice shapes the way that we see the world? Whose standard determines our values and actions? Now, most of the people, most of the time, I think, don't consider this question at all. We go along, often under the illusion that we are doing our own thing. But we aren't. None of us is. The great economist, John Maynard Keynes, very wittily summarized this, that he would come across practical men. In his day, they would have been industrialists, bluff people who considered them to be exempt from any intellectual influences. And yet, he said, they are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. What he's saying there is there are guys he would meet who were working in the world of economics and in industry when he was there, and they would say, we have no time for your theories, John. We're just men of practical work. And he'd say, actually, everything you do is following some guy whose ideas were debunked 50 years ago. You just don't realize it. Just like all those kids having their hair cut, being conformed to David Beckham. Or, for those of you who are of a different bent, The Devil Wears Prada. There's a very famous scene in The Devil Wears Prada in which Meryl Streep, who's playing the head of a major fashion house, she's very obviously modelled on the lady who used to run Vogue, describes in detail how the Primark sweater that the heroine is wearing is influenced by a piece of fashion at a fashion show 5 years previously that she was dismissing as utterly irrelevant to her life. And she describes how the ideas travel down, and now she's the slave of that fashion show. right? She's following it unthinkingly. Or as Bob Dylan put it, you've got to serve somebody. Everybody serves somebody. Each of us serves someone. Everyone has someone as our teacher. If we are to pursue a true Christian life, then we need to ask ourselves honestly who or what this is, and then work to make sure it's Jesus. The reason I'm laboring this point is because if you've never given it any conscious thought, the chances are it's not Jesus. The chances are it's someone else who's the biggest influence on your life, intellectual influence on your life, moral influence on your life. Christians need to examine themselves and then make sure that's Jesus who shapes our attitudes. So that's the first thing we see in Jesus' teaching here. The second thing is that sainthood requires works, not just words. Sainthood requires works, not just words. Zach touched on this really well last week. We can feel a little bit uncomfortable with this in a Protestant church. But the reality is, St. Paul talks about the faith that saves you, the faith that you live, is faith that works in love. Faith working in love. Jesus is very clear here. Having the right teacher is not enough. We have to put into practice what he says. Having the right teacher is not enough. We have to put into practice what he says. I think most of us intuitively recognize that Jesus is right. We don't become different people by talking, but by doing. Anyone who's resolved to start a diet on the 1st of January, only to be binging chocolate by the end of the week, understands that saying something doesn't make it a reality. When I was growing up, my heroes were Eric Cantona, David Ginola, and Miles Davis. I will say that I've never karate kicked anyone in the chest, so that's a win for not following Cantona. I also can't play football like David Ginola, and I cannot play the trumpet at all. Do you know why? Because listening to a lot of Miles Davis and watching a lot of Eric Cantona and David Ginola on the TV were not enough to make me a great trumpet player or footballer. I needed to do it. So it's worth asking us what stops us from pursuing sainthood. What is it that stops us from pursuing sainthood? This will be different for each of us, but I think there are some common causes. First, insincerity. Often when I say I want to lose weight, I mean it in the moment, but what I really mean is I want to eat chocolate. But I wish I could do it and be thinner. That's what I really mean. We can do the same thing with faith. We can say, I want to be different, to be kinder, to be stronger, to be wiser, to be more peaceful, to be more generous. But what I really mean is, I want to carry on living exactly the way I am now, but feel different about myself. That's actually the root of religious hypocrisy. I want the label Christian without the difficult doing bits. You can't be a generous person without giving away money. That's like Christian Ethics 101. You can't be generous without giving away stuff. It just doesn't work. We need to call it out for what it is. It's insincerity. We don't really mean it. And I wonder how many of us, I know that I'm giving examples from my own life, struggle with this. They say I want to be patient, but I don't want to be with difficult people. Because they really annoy me. I say I want to be generous, but I also quite like my stuff. I say I want to be peaceful, but it feels really good when I lose my temper. The first step in becoming someone who's like Jesus is actually really meaning that that's more important than these other things. I doubt, though, in this room that insincerity is actually the biggest issue. I just name it because it's something we need to watch out for in our culture. I think a bigger issue is distraction, certainly for me. I think it's probably the biggest issue for Christians in our age. There is so much we can do that provides us with an immediate dopamine hit, that we lapse into doing that instead of the thing we really want to do. Right? If you see something of this dynamic if you read through Romans 7. Now, Romans 7 is a complicated passage. St. Paul is obviously not talking about Netflix directly. But he describes this dynamic of wanting to do something which is good, to pursue something that's good, but finding it really hard. And actually ending up choosing to do something different instead. It's really difficult to solve this. I actually think it's the hardest time in the whole of humanity to live for the purposes of distraction. The world has never been more distracting. And that's not just true for religious life, it's true for everything good. Why don't people spend as much time together as they used to? Because they're distracted. Why are families not in communication as much as they used to be? Because they're distracted from one another. But it is possible to start to solve this. The first way of doing that is to do what we talked about at the beginning, becoming self-aware, aware of what we actually do with our time. If you've never stopped and tried to notice for a week how much time you spend doing different things, it's really worth doing. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to do, but let me put it this way. For the guys and ladies who are in business, we do this all the time. They used to be called time and motion studies. I'm sure they're not called that anymore. What are you spending your time doing to check that it's what you're being paid to do, right? Or what is a business spending its time doing to make sure that it's actually doing its work as well as it could be? But when it comes to our personal lives, we don't do that. We live intentionally when there's money on the line, but in our individual lives, we don't live intentionally. We're not aware. So I want to suggest that an easy way of doing that is every evening for a week, just note down, think back, and try and be realistic about how much time did I spend reading the paper, talking with my friends, reading my Bible, watching TV, whatever, going to work. Then set goals for what you want your life to look like. What do I actually wish I was doing? Do I wish I was reading my Bible for 20 minutes a day? But I'm finding that I hear this all the time, and I've said it. I don't have time. I wish I was reading my Bible for 20 minutes a day, but I don't have time to do it. I'm sorry, that's not true. Every single person in this room has 20 minutes a day to read the Bible. 10 minutes a day to read the Bible. 20 minutes if you spend 10 minutes praying as well. Every single person. I've literally never met anybody, who didn't have 20 minutes in their day to do it. I have sat with and talked through with really great saints who are Christian parents of young children, where women who were breastfeeding most of the night and were exhausted, and they put me to shame because they would sit there with their headphones on while they were breastfeeding, listening to the Bible. Right? So I gently but firmly want to say, I never want to hear someone say, I don't have time. Right? You don't have time because you're choosing to spend it with other things. I don't have time because I am choosing to spend it on other things. And we need to call that out and choose to be different about it. Set goals. Be smart. Be specific. Be measured. Be achievable. Be resourced. That means make sure you've got a Bible if you want to read a Bible. Be timed. When are you going to do it? Right? Again, for those who have been in the workplace, this language is basic. But it is a revelation when you start to apply it to your own life. Jesus is saying, this is what it means to become a saint. Do what I say. The third thing I should say, and we've already touched on this, is that being part of a life group really, really helps. I have a master's degree in Wesleyan theology and spirituality. And the key insight that John Wesley had, he wasn't a brilliant preacher, actually. I mean, he preached a lot, but he wasn't rhetorical fireworks going off. He wasn't Barack Obama, where people felt chills when he was speaking. There were other speakers who were better. The reason why Wesley founded a movement that has millions and millions, 65 million people in Wesleyan churches or something like that around the world today, is because he organized people into little groups so they could support one another. Being part of a life group makes a huge difference to whether you're going to actually grow as a Christian or not. It's not the only way, it's not essential, but it really, really helps because other people really, really help. And then third, exhaustion. This is the third obstacle, and I bet for a lot of people in this area, you just feel tired. And I would imagine that there's a number of people here who are just hearing me say this stuff and thinking, oh, Phil, it sounds great, but I'm just so tired. It's worth naming why that is, and it's not the fault of anyone in this room. It's because our culture is in hock to an idol, right? Late Western culture worships money, absolutely worships it. Everything is justified by the economic means, to make more money for people, to make more money for the country. I'm not talking about individual people becoming rich now. I mean everyone working so that we as a country make. Why do we need to get both parents out of the home as soon as possible? So we will fund free childcare, but we won't fund a mum to stay at home with her kids, because then she's making more money for the country, because you've got to make more money. Economically productive. That is an idol. It is an idol that has built nothing but exhaustion in our culture. And what is worse, when you're living in this system, you can't escape from it. I want to acknowledge all these things because it's not fair. And I know it's not fair. Heather and I are looking for houses at the moment. The average house price, it doesn't matter whether we go down to, if we want to stay with our kids in the school they're in at the moment, it's going to end up costing us in rent and transport somewhere between £2,000 and £2,500 every single month before we spend a penny on anything other than a roof and getting the kids to school. That is nearly £30,000 a year. The system that constructed that is wicked. It is immoral. And it is abusing everyone here. And you're victims of it to some extent. That's why you're so tired. It might be also because you've got young children. You might be exhausted because of that. That is a really tiring season of life. When I had 3 children under the age of 5, I don't think I've ever been as tired. We need, therefore, to be realistic about what is possible. Given that you can't escape the rental market, you can't escape the fact that you shouldn't want to escape the fact that you've got young kids or that you've got grandkids or that you have to commute to work or that your boss is exploiting you at work, right? These things are all real and we have to live with them. Be realistic. So don't set out to be Martin Luther or Eve Conger, great theologians. Someone told me that Eve Conger, the great Catholic theologian, probably wrote and published an academic paper every week for 50 years. Well, as someone who's published 7 academic papers, let me tell you, that is just mind-boggling. But he was a Catholic monk, right? He didn't have kids. He didn't have a wife. He didn't have a life. He didn't have to commute. All he did was read and publish. He's in a totally different position from a young mum who is juggling raising 3 kids and trying to get work done. You need to be realistic about the goals you set for your circumstances. Work out what's possible for you and then do that. And always aim for something slightly smaller than you want to and do it regularly, and you'll find it expands. So don't start off by saying, I'm going to read the Bible in a year. Start by saying, I'm going to read it in 2 years. That's 5 minutes a day. Right? If you can't read it every day because you're on a train for 40 minutes in the morning and 40 minutes in the evening, get it on headphones. That's how I read the Bible every year. I listen to a podcast. If you don't have an hour to pray, right? I'm paid to pray. It's great. At the moment, anyway. I spend an hour in the mornings praying and meditating. It would be mad if you were going to get the 6:30 a.m. train from Walton Station and you said, I'm going to spend an hour in the morning praying and meditating. I mean, you're going to do it for what, a week at that? Don't do that. Set 10 minutes. Set something realistic and do it. So why should we want to do this? Well, Jesus explains, finally, that if we learn to live the way he teaches us to, if we learn to be like him in our behavior and our character, then we build lives that endure in the midst of trials and suffering. One of the greatest boxers of all time, Mike Tyson, a figure from my childhood, accidentally put his finger or his glove on this in an interview. He famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right? If you want to remember one thing from this sermon, remember my lunchtime summary. If you remember two, remember that. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Now, I don't suggest that you turn to Mike Tyson for life advice particularly. He certainly wasn't in the past. I don't know what he's like now. He was a very, very nasty man at one point in his life. But he was bang on about that. That describes life perfectly. Everybody has a plan about how they're going to react until something really hard happens. And Tyson's point was, that's the moment where your plans go out the window and your character is shown. What he was saying is that's what it is to be a great boxer. Is to be not someone who has a plan that I'm going to hit him with my right and then my left and then my right and then my left. Oh, flipping heck, he's broken my nose. What am I going to do now? That's when who you are underneath shines through. At some point, my friends and fellow sinners, life is going to punch you in the mouth. And when that happens, all our words and intentions go out the window, and all we are left in that moment is who are we underneath it all? Suffering reveals character. You might think of the verse in St. Peter's first letter. Your faith has been tried like gold being refined. In these verses, Jesus is saying that the way to build a life that can absorb the trials we experience and stand, even flourish, is to put into action what he says. Not to believe it or preach it, but do it. Now, this is the story of Jesus' own life. Faced with betrayal and humiliation and execution, he acknowledged the pain. He sought the grace to endure and then kept on going. Satan hit him as hard as he could in the mouth, but he didn't fall. That kind of life doesn't prevent the storms from coming. It doesn't stop the punches. But it means that when they come, we are ready, we can endure, and we can triumph. If you want a good example of this, watch the George Foreman biography on Netflix. I'm on a bit of a boxing kick at the moment. We had an interesting moment with Abby at school where she was asked to write a project about something to do with animals, and she was at this point 8, I think. And she wrote for her teacher this lovely little passage. You know how they do it. It's very sweet. You know, they'll try and write a side of A4. And she said, I really don't like it when I see animals fighting. I thought, oh, it's very sweet. It's but I love to watch people fight. And the teachers showed this to us at parents' evening. Pastor, community pastor. We had to explain we'd been watching Rocky. And she wasn't just watching bare knuckle boxing. It wasn't like Fight Club in our house. Watch the George Foreman biography on Netflix and see what happens at the end. It's a true story. I remember it happening. It's an extraordinary story of someone who's learned to roll with the punches, but because of who he is deep underneath, he's one of the greatest boxers of all time, able to triumph when it seems utterly unreasonable that he should do so. My friends, do you want a life like that? Do you want a life like that where someone looks at it and thinks, how is he still standing? How is she still joyful in the midst of trials? How has she coped with everything that's been thrown at her and she's still, there's something shining through. You know, when Notre Dame Cathedral burnt to the ground, there was a moment, you can find the images online, in which the gold cross of the altar gleamed in the midst of the ashes, because gold doesn't melt at the same temperature wood burns. So all the rest of the cathedral was in ashes around it, and in the midst of it, the gold gleamed more brightly than it had before, because everything that was impure about it had been taken away. Do you want to be someone whose life looks like that? Who, when everyone else around you is in the midst of ashes, you start to shine. So what might this mean in practice? Well, first, meditate on Scripture. The first key to becoming like Jesus is to take his words into yourself. Learn to love them. Ponder what they mean for you. Psalm 1 puts it this way: their delight is in the law of the Lord, and they meditate on his law day and night. If you're looking at a good place to start this journey, there's some amazing resources out there. You can begin with the Lectio 365 app, or Hallow, the prayer app, or you can download the Bible in 1 Year app from HTB. All of these are free. Hallow then has a subscription to get on a higher level of resources, but they're all free to start off with. You can start with something like that. Second, join a life group, or how about this? Go to the one you've already joined. Don't just be on the mailing list. I'm not looking at anyone in particular. In verse 42, Jesus makes the point that sometimes we need others in order to become like him. We need friends to challenge us about the stuff we should be doing, right? You notice that he says, take the plank out of your own eye and then help your brother or sister take the speck out of theirs, right? We need each other. We need friends to challenge us about stuff we should be doing or stop doing. We need friends to stand with us in our trials. We need friends to rejoice in our triumphs. We need people to go to the football with. Right? These are in descending order from the sublime to the ridiculous, but they're all part of becoming like Jesus. Third, pray and examine. Pray and set goals to your spiritual life. Then take stock of how you're doing. There are loads of ways you can do this, but a good one is to take some time at the end of the day, reflect on what has happened, and name the things you are thankful for or that you regret. A fruitful life is marked by work, by courage, and by patience. True Christianity makes saints. That's men and women whose lives look like Jesus and can stand in the midst of trials. What we're going to do is take a minute just to be silent. I'm going to pray for the Holy Spirit to come. And if he's speaking to you, I encourage you to take a moment just to respond to what he's saying. And then we're going to take communion together.